Commissioner, could you have imagined when you joined the force in 1982 that one day you'd be sitting in this office as the chief?
No, I couldn't. It's something that, that you always hold to do the best you can in your life. But, my brother did this role for 10 years, and he did it from 1994 to 2000. And I always seen how much it took out of him, draining-wise, in his life. And I always said, geez, who would want that job in their right mind? So, to be here is not only an honor, but, I know it's a monumental task. But I think I'm up to the challenge. And, again, I just want to thank Mayor Walsh for having the confidence to put me in charge of such an important task.
You have really come up through the ranks. You've done every job imaginable in the department. What was the hardest part for you?
Well, I think always the hardest part is dealing with the victims that we see in this profession. There's a lot of great days, such as working Fenway Park and a lot of these sports, but the worst part of this job is seeing, for instance, what we've seen on Marathon Day. The young child Martin Richards and the Campbell girl and Lindsay Lou and last week I was there when the 9-year-old was shot in the chest. You never get over that type of stuff. So that's the low part of this job. We love helping people, but there's unfortunately a lot of tragedy. We see that, we're human. We have young kids at home, and that's something we always live with. So the job is great. I can say over the 31 years, there's never a day that I haven't got up that I didn't want to go to work.
One of the things that's happening in communities all around Massachusetts, and Boston has had a problem as well, is the uptake in the use of opiates. Yeah. And you announced last week that you were going to start training your force with the use of the antidote Narcan. How will that work?
Well, again, I just had a meeting before I came in here with all my captains, and we're going to bring the training right to the roll calls, where the supervisors and the patrolmen are going to be trained in its use. I think, as Senator Markey yesterday was going, around the state, we all realized the importance of this drug, and we're going to have it available to every one of our officers. So if they run into someone who's in desperate need of this drug, we're going to make sure the officers are well trained in using it, and I think it's going to make a huge difference. But again, I think it shows Mayor Walsh's commitment to dealing with the scourge of heroin that just seems to be sweeping not only Boston and Massachusetts but across the country.
Yeah, it's been used as sort of an experiment with just a handful of police departments in the state. So is this something that should be a statewide?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when we had the Red Sox celebration, we had Quincy policemen in that day to help us out, and they came across someone in need of that day, and they used it, and it was very effective. And in fact, we brought them to our CompStat and gave them all accommodation, because thank God for that drug, they saved that individual's life. So, we've seen firsthand how well it's worked, but I think every department across the state should have it readily available.
This big drug kingpin in Mexico was just picked up and arrested and possibly will be extradited here, but what's going to make a big dent in your mind in terms of the trafficking? It just seems that the supply is endless.
Yeah, and unfortunately it is. I think, we got that drug, but there'll be someone who just takes his place. Those cartels, those big, kingpin, they're such an organization that someone's always ready to take their place. All we can do is attack what's going on, obviously, here in the city. We have a very active drug unit. We have Superintendent Bobby Myrna, who is really motivating those guys. I think last week we got 1.5 kilos of cocaine, and we grabbed the guy in a motor vehicle stop with $54,000 in his car. We're continuing out there trying to attack not only the open source drug dealing that's going on in the corners, but also the major operations, at least here in the city. But, I'm just concerned. I know medical marijuana is coming on board pretty soon, but I worry about all the public safety issues surrounding that. I know Mayor Walsh is very concerned about it being a gateway drug, as well as I am.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Are you concerned about the fact that marijuana is going to be legal? There are going to be 35 clinics around the area, and So you think it is? It's a gateway to the next thing?
Yeah, I think it is, but it's also going to pose quite a bit of issues for us. I mean, we've seen with the EBT cards how those were abused by certain segments of the population. I also think this medical marijuana is people are going to go in with phony back problems and every ailment possible, and they're going to get these prescriptions, and they're going to go in and purchase this marijuana, and you can get up to 2 months' supply of this drug. And so, we're going to see people out there getting it and selling it on the corners. We're going to see people getting robbed as they leave after having their 2 month supply. So I have a lot of security issues, not only around the location of the facility, but as people, walk away with their supply, and also people, selling their supply. So, I'm not a big. I know it has some great medical reasons, but I think it's really going to be abuse.
And as you know, some corners of the world and even people in law enforcement believe that maybe the time has come just to legalize the whole kit and caboodle. Cocaine, heroin, where do you stand on that?
Well, I'm not for legalization of drugs at all. We see what heroin's doing to our community. If we make that readily available, you can imagine everybody will be walking around like zombies. They really will. And I think we're seeing that now, the dangers of drug. I think the OxyContin, the heroin on the street, it's killing a lot of young people. So I'm not for legalization at all, and especially even with marijuana. I mean, it is a gateway drug, very much like alcohol is. So I'm strictly against it. Definitely not.
Guns, you mentioned just 2 seconds ago. I mean, Mayor Walsh wants to have this buyback program. We've tried it in the past. Police departments tried it with limited success. There was the anecdote of somebody coming in from Maine with a couple of antique firearms, and does that make a dent really in the problematic guns on the street?
I think it does. I mean, last gun back we did, I think we got over 1,000 guns off the street. And those are 1,000 less guns that can end up in the wrong hands. We've seen what happened on Morton Street when the 14-year-old had access to a gun, playing with it, and he killed his 9-year-old brother. That's the type of stuff we want to prevent. Yesterday on Lyndhurst Street in Dorchester, we had someone who legally possessed 4 guns have his house broken into, and 4 guns were taken. So there's way too many guns, both legally owned and illegally owned, in the city that if we can get our hands on those for a certain amount, then I think the program will be effective. And again, this is only a small portion of what our strategy is going to be. We're hoping for an anonymous tip line. We're pulling that together right now, where we'll go after more of the street guns, where if people know someone on the street who's carrying and they give us a tip, whether they text us or phone it, we're going to have a bank on board with us where they'll be able to go into that bank and collect a substantial reward. So we know the gun buyback in itself is not, you're not going to have the streetwise kids turning their guns, but we're hoping the tip line will do it. And we're also going to do a kiosk at all the district stations where no questions asked. If a mother wants to come in and drop a gun in it, like we do with the drug kiosks, then that they'll be allowed to do that. So, and obviously, we're working with our community partners to help us. I've reached out to the clergy. I've reached out to groups such as Tina Cherry's Peace Institute, Mona Lisa Smith and Mothers for Justice and Equality. I've reached out for everyone to help us in this effort to get the guns off the street.
In the case of the 14-year-old that shot the 9-year-old, the Pena family, do you know where that gun came from? Was it a legal gun?
No, it clearly wasn't a legal gun. I was still trying to find out where the 14-year-old got it, but,
But it was in the house.
No one in that house had a license to carry. That gun was not supposed to be in that house.
There's a local group, too, Lipstick. When Mayor Menino was in office, his big effort was to get people to talk. And it's still a problem, the people that's, where that gun come from. I mean, is this group going to be active in that? Because people see things, they hear things, they know things. Right. There are a lot of unsolved cases that could be solved if people spoke up.
Right. And that's what we're hoping for. We're looking for more cooperation from the community. Last night I met with the Boston chapter of the NAACP, And that's exactly what I asked them to, if they know where guns are, if they have information that can help us. We're not the enemy out there. We need this to be a cohesive operation where we're all working together. Lipstate's a great organization. I know Mayor Walsh and myself are going over there shortly. They're going to do a public relations where they're going to be working with the MBTA and do some billboards about females being involved in the violence. I think that's really a big issue for us. I think over the last couple of weeks, we had an incident last week where an individual was selling drugs down at Boylston in Washington, down the downtown crossing area. And when we were approaching, he handed the gun off to the young 18-year-old girl. He was 28. So she ends up getting locked up for holding the gun. And a week before that, we stopped a girl who was holding a silver revolver fully loaded in her underwear. So we're realizing a lot of the gang kids out there are using a lot of these girls on the street. And unfortunately, we've seen one of the homicides we've had this year was in Mattapan, where a young lady was shot who had a young baby. But we see a lot of young females out there, either through their own choice or being forced to run with a lot of these kids who are involved in the gun violence. So this is a great effort on the behalf of Lipstick to try to encourage girls not to be pressured into running with kids who intimidate them into carrying these guns.
By the way, last night the Reverend Jeffrey Brown proposed that there be a lawsuit filed against the gun manufacturers. Right. Where do you stand on that?
Well, anything that can help. If that's one angle to go, I'm all for it. Reverend Brown has been very instrumental over the years in helping us curb the violence, but I'm all for that. Recently I was asked about the smart gun, where you need the fingerprint. Anything that can help us, obviously, I'm all for. So if it means going and file a lawsuit against the manufacturers because they don't basically have enough legal obstacles to people getting guns, then I'm all for it.
You got handed a lot of cases that were unsolved. One was a shooting involving 4 women. I think it was August of 2012. Right. 3 of them died. 1 of them lived. I mean, somebody must know who shot those girls. Right. That's another example. What about the one who's living? She doesn't have any idea. Right.
I mean, that's the problem we have. We always say, we'll give anyone the protection they need if they come forward. I think sometimes they feel intimidated. But whether we have to relocate them to another state, we'll put them in a witness protection program. But it's hard convincing people that if they come forward with information. But I think through our community policing effort, we've come a long way in building trust with the community. And I think people just have to be reassured out there that they can rely on us. And if they give us information, they're not going to get retribution for doing that. So. That's a message we continually try to push out to the community, but, we're very supportive of anyone who comes forward.
One of the criticisms that Ed Davis faced was over the makeup of his department, that there wasn't much diversity at the top. You, of course, have just promoted Willie Gross, his first deputy chief superintendent, whatever his title is there.
Yeah. Willie's a great guy. He brings a lot of wealth of experience and knowledge. Willie's been out there 29 years in the gang unit, on the streets of some of the tougher part of the city. Willie brings a lot of knowledge, a lot of credibility, and I made Superintendent Randy Halstead. He's the night commander. So right now, running the day-to-day operations, I have Willie, an African American, and at night I have Randy. So the top 2 people day and nights right now are minority officers, and I also appoint 3 or 4 others. So we have a command staff now that reflects the diversity of this city. So I think Mayor Walsh was very supportive of all that. I know it's a major goal of his, not only in the police department, but in his cabinet. I know he's taken some criticism of late, I've read in the paper, but he's working hard. Give him a little time. I'm sure he's going to make good on his promise. And
I'm sure a lot of people thought, well, the police department, the head of the commissioner, that would have been an ideal spot to put an African American too.
Yeah, and if it was Willie, if it was me, ultimately, I'm sure Mayor Walsh's #1 concern is the safety of the residents, and I think having me and Willie as a 1-2 team, I think I'm hoping he made the right move there. But I have confidence in Willie. I have a great command staff. I think we're going to do great things and make the city safer.
You mentioned the marathon at the beginning of the interview. You ran the marathon last year.
Yes.
Take me back to that day for you.
Well, I went up like I did. I've run 17 Boston marathons before, so I went up there, I ran the race. It was a beautiful day, feeling great, coming down Boylston Street. My wife Terry and my son Will were in the grandstands. I was waving to them. And, like any other day, a special day in Boston, the marathon. I was home when I was in the Boston Athletic Club in the hot tub, believe it or not, when one of my officers, Cecil Jones, ran in and told me a couple bombs have gone up at the finish line. And I'm like, that can't be. No way. We've had a history of transformer fires up around that area. Yeah. We had one recently off of Dalton Street. So the whole way up there, when I had rushed home and flew into the scene, all I could think of, this can't be happening here. And unfortunately, when I got out of my car and walked on Boylston Street, it's a sight that I'll never forget. Seeing the young victims lying on the street, seeing shop windows blown out, barriers blown apart, baby carriage just abandoned. It was something that you would never, ever picture or even guess would happen in the city of Boston.
What did you think?
Well, I think I was initially stunned. I think sort of dumbfounded, saying, geez, where do we go from here? Who could have did such a tragedy to our city? Boston Marathon, city of Boston, this isn't supposed to happen here. So, it took me a while for that all to settle in before, I met up with Commissioner Davis and Chief Linsky, and we put a game plan together, not only securing the area to make sure there's no more explosives, but also put a game plan together to secure the area and start looking for evidence of who might have did such a terrible deed.
What's it going to be like this year? Because I can remember I was at the finish line last year early in the morning, and then I came back after the incident, but I was thinking, wow, this feels like overkill. Yeah. Homeland Security and FBI and everybody with a badge and tape and everything. I mean, how much more security can you have?
Yeah, unfortunately, since April 15th, I think since 9/11, everybody's become security conscious. We never, in our worst dreams, thought something like this could happen in the city of Boston into the marathon. But, we've been working on a plan for about the last 4 or 5 months to make this the great event it always is. We're going to have a lot of uniformed officers out there, but we're more importantly going to have a lot of undercover officers mixed in the crowd. We're going to have a lot more bomb dogs out there, and we're going to have security checkpoints where people are going to have to pass through. But I just want to assure people it's not going to be intimidating. It's not going to look like an armed camp. We'll have some more cameras out there, but we realize this is a special day in the city, and I don't want people to be intimidated by the presence of officers with, assault rifles or, the sort of the Ninja Turtle gear that you recognize. I want this to be as low-key, and so the spirit of the marathon isn't sort of defeated by this heavy presence of police. But believe me, we're going to have plenty undercovers and a lot of visibility out there, but not overwhelming. So it intimidates people.
I mean, it's 26 miles. What do you do about the rest of the route, too?
Yeah, and that's the problem. 26.2 miles, it's a soft target. It's a long route to cover, not only running, but obviously the police. And we're working with the state police. We're working with the other 7 cities and towns to secure it the best we can. That being said, unfortunately, a lot of these targets are soft. We can't always guarantee that we can lock down any site, but we try our best. We'll have plenty of other resources out there trying to make sure it's a safe day. And I know, working with the state, we're going to put out some educational efforts so people know what the rules are going to be on that day. I know certain items are not going to be allowed, backpacks into certain areas, coolers into certain areas, very much like we did July 4th.
So you mentioned your brother did this job for 10 years. Can you see yourself doing it that long?
I don't think so. I've been on 33 years. I think when my brother got it, he was a lot younger than me. I think he was probably 43 years old. And, but five, who knows? I enjoy this job, and if I'm here 10 years, I'll do it for 10 years. But I know right now it's big on my family. I'm out a lot more than I want to be. Some nights I'm not home 9, 10. I'm getting more calls at 1, 2 in the morning. My wife sort of yells at me constantly to get away from that foolish, iPhone that I have. So, it's a lot more demanding on me. And so to do it 10 years, I think would be unfair to my family. I'm at the stage of my career where, maybe in 5 years, knock on wood, if I last that long, it will be time to spend more time with my family. Again, if I'm 33 years on, after 38 years, I think I've had a good run.
So I got to ask you, where'd you get the nickname Mouse?
Well, it's sort of comical. My father, again, and again, I loved my dad. He brought it. Unfortunately, my mom died when I was 3. My father had to bring up 6 boys, and he was left with 6 young blonde boys under the age of 11 when my mother died. And I was the baby, and I was small for my age, and so he's the one who nicknamed me Mouse. And he always said there's a mouse in every house. And as my brothers brought me up, and then my father passed away when I was 14, his main saying to my brothers always is make sure you take care of the mouse. And so, the only regret I have, honestly, looking back at how well I've done and how well my brother Paul has done, is that my father wasn't around. He was very proud of his boys. I had 2 brothers who went on to be chiefs in the fire department, and my brother Tom, who's a boss on Edison. I just wish he was around to see how well his boys turned out.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Looks good. Excellent.